Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hash Rate. My name is Mark Jeffrey. My guest today is JJ, Joseph Jacks of OSS Capital. Hello, JJ.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for having me again.
Welcome back to the show. This is your third time. You are my officially my most popular guest of all time. So
Amazing.
Congratulations.
I'm honored.
So we've been chatting back and forth a little bit on X recently, and I've noticed that you seem to have a little spring in your step. You're a little jauntier than normal in a good way, right? And of course, I know that the price of TAO is up 130% over the last month or so. So I know that's part of the spring in your step, but I also sense a new bullishness from you on the quality of the developers and the projects now emerging on Bittensor. So what sort of caught your eye and what's got you this excited?
Well, yeah, I mean, price activity definitely is one interesting thing, but I think that there's just a significant increase in the number of subnets that are producing really interesting outputs. And so people really understand Bittensor is a blockchain that was inspired by the design of Bitcoin in terms of how the tokenomics work and this idea of proof of work. And for people who aren't indoctrinated, proof of work in the Bitcoin sense is a deterministic computation called solving for a SHA-256 hash at a certain threshold. And when you solve for that at a certain threshold and you display that output, broadcast that output to the network, you get rewarded in what's called a block of Bitcoin. And so that's a proof of work that is deterministically accurate. It is known that you're going to produce a certain very large number.
Yeah, and basically, just to sort of break that down for a second, because I think this will be relevant to your point, you're guessing the hash of the previous block, and there is no way to compute that other than to keep trying guesses. So it's like guessing the number of gumballs in the jar, right? And whoever gets the right answer first is the winner. And so, but it's kind of useless work, right? It's sort of, there's a lot of computation energy being spent guessing gumballs. It's not really making the world a better place.
Well, I would actually slightly disagree with that it's totally useless. I think that it is useful to the extent that it's securing.
It secures the network. It's useful in that sense. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a huge benefit. Sure.
Yeah, it makes the network secure. But in terms of kind of proof of work as a design, Bittensor really builds on that and says, let's use a proof of work blockchain to create incentives that reward people, not just for guessing a certain threshold of SHA-256, which is deterministic, and you can mathematically prove that you answered correctly.
Yeah.
It says let's create proof of useful work in the sense that we want to see more accurate AI models in the world, or we want to see faster AI models in the world, or we want to see more synthetic data, or we want to see more organic data, or we want to see labeled data, annotated data. Mm-hmm. Right? OpenAI outsources their data labeling to a company in Kenya called Sama, which is ironic because Sam Altman's Twitter handle is Sama. And they pay people $3 an hour to look at pornography and child porn and horrible things.
Oh, geez.
It's actually inhumane. Okay. So
now, why the hell would OpenAI pay people to look at that stuff? I don't understand.
It's pretty horrible, right?
Is it because explain that to me? Why are they doing that?
They want to do that so they can label the models such that they are aligned and censored from providing certain outputs. Now, there are certain things there that are important because you don't want to be producing CSAM and horrible images. And you don't want it to be possible for people to produce those things using your AI models. So to a good extent, you need to align the models or censor the models to prevent people from doing illegal things with them.
So just to clarify, so OpenAI is paying people to look at horrible things so that they can train the AI model to sift out horrible things, right? Is that basically what's going on?
Roughly speaking, yes. Yeah, roughly speaking, yes. I'm just giving you an example of one of many things that you can model as an incentive mechanism on Bittensor and get rewarded for producing proof of useful, valuable work.
Yep.
And that is computationally verifiable by the validators and by the miners on the network. And so Bittensor is by far the most unique and interesting decentralized incentive-driven system since Bitcoin. And it builds on and honors Bitcoin and respects those original ideas, which are really the creation of this industry we call blockchain, crypto, Web3, whatever label you want to put on it. The word blockchain was not mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper. But the ideas really gave birth to this industry. And I'm not really like a crypto Web3 blockchain person. I'm an open source person. So I've had to actually learn a lot of these things over the last few years. But Bittensor started off as a single computation network, which was rewarding people for creating tokens, for inferencing a very primitive language model, something like GPT-1 or GPT-2 level of a capability. And a year ago, as you know, in October 2023, Bittensor introduced the idea of basically slicing the network into these smaller units of the overall token supply called subnets. This is a computer science networking idea going back many decades. Subnets or subnetworks are basically sort of virtual slices of the overall network. And what subnets do is they allow you to create a specific incentive mechanism for a specific type of task or computation or commodity, if you will. And so what Bitcoin does is it uses this very high entropy problem space of SHA-256 hashing to produce digital scarcity for basically inventing a digital representation of money, solving double spend, solving a lot of different things. And you have this cryptographic ledger with transactions that go back to the beginning, and you can use that as a store of value and a medium of exchange. That's why people like Bitcoin. It's never been hacked. It's just really modern evolution of money. Whereas with Bittensor, you're really creating a modern evolution of capitalism and creating fractal sort of incentive mechanisms for anything. So you could conceivably write an incentive mechanism on one of these subnetworks, one of these subnets on Bittensor that actually does exactly what Bitcoin does. But then you would then have the challenge of, how do you actually secure and incentivize something that is only an overall slice of 21 million tokens, as opposed to having a network that is just for one particular commodity. So conceivably, you could say that like doing that is technically possible, but it doesn't actually have any practical utility or practical use, which is why we have a layer one that's dedicated purely to that use case, which is what's called Bitcoin.
Hash Rate is sponsored by Ledger. With the announcement of Ledger Flex and Ledger Stacks, Ledger gives you the best security on the planet for your crypto and identity. Ledger Flex and Stacks drive an e-ink screen with the same secure chip that's in your credit card and passport. Except, instead of protecting the secrets of banks and governments, Ledger protects your secrets and your private keys. Ledger supports Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, and more than 200 other tokens. The secure touchscreen, plus the Ledger Live app, means that whether you're buying your very first Bitcoin or doing your 2000th swap, you can do it securely and easily with your Ledger. And as always, use my link, shop.ledger.com/hashrate in the show notes to get the very best price whenever you buy a Ledger Flex or Stacks. OpNet is the ultimate solution for deploying smart contracts directly onto the Bitcoin blockchain, leveraging its security and stability. As a meta protocol, OpNet allows you to run Ethereum-style smart contracts on any UTXO-based blockchain, including Bitcoin and fractal Bitcoin. With OpNet, there's no need to rewrite your existing smart contracts from scratch. Simply deploy them on OpNet, and you're live on Bitcoin or fractal with no modifications required. Start your journey on OpNet today by visiting opnet.org. Yeah. Okay. So basically, we start. So Bittensor started life as a single subnet, effectively,
Correct.
and then everybody was sort of piled in there, and it was basically trying to reproduce ChatGPT more or less. And then fall of last year, the heads of Bittensor, the community, the committee, I guess, decided to divide that single subnet, the single universe, into a multiverse of 50 or so, originally like 28, but now roughly 50 subnets. Each one of those subnets is focused on a specific vertical AI problem, more or less AI. Not everything is AI, but most of it is AI.
Correct.
And it's things like protein folding. It's things like you described, how to train models to censor out horrible things, how to predict sports games, DeFi yield optimization. So these are all sort of categories that Bittensor is currently covering in their subnets.
The things that are AI focused that I think are very interesting and will likely earn most of the reward and the incentive from the network because they stay within the scope of like what Bittensor was designed to do are things like pre-training neural networks from scratch for doing token prediction of text, coding, image, vision, what have you. So AI is neural networks. A neural network is a type of computational paradigm for combining a bunch of computers to train a particular piece of software on the representations of a lot of data that get encoded and compressed into a neural network from which you can interact and prompt that neural network and have the prompts that come out or prompts that are given to the context window of the neural net drive the outputs and guide the outputs. And so we're just in the early days of experimenting with how this can actually work. There's a lot of techniques that have been invented. There's many architectures that are going to come about. But Bittensor basically breaks down the problem of AI into many subcomponent problems, essentially. So you can say, let's capture a lot of data. Let's generate a lot of synthetic or organic data. Let's put a lot of compute together. Let's build better infrastructure for people to fine-tune the models. Let's build better infrastructure for people to label and annotate data, which, by the way, I used a pretty dark example that there's ways that you can label data that are just much more innocuous and just generally practical and useful. Like, I'm asking for a picture of a dog. It gave me a gorilla. Okay, it's not a dog; it's a gorilla. We need to label it properly, such that the model doesn't make that mistake again or doesn't hallucinate again.
Well, so we had David Fields on last week, and he runs Ready AI, which is subnet 33,
right.
And Ready AI is a Bittensor version of Scale.ai, which is worth about $14 billion, something like that.
Yes, the problem space of labeling data and information is really huge. There are many subnets that will implement similar ideas to the Ready AI subnet. There's one coming out soon called Dojo, which I believe, I can't remember the number, but neither here nor there. There's going to be hundreds, thousands of subnets in the future. Many of them will overlap. Many of them will have similar capabilities. Many of them will have slightly different incentive mechanisms. We actually have a pretty significant number of subnets right now doing inference, some version of inference where you're kind of proxying models somewhere in some provider elsewhere, or I really get annoyed with the thumbs up thing on the video. That's funny. You're proxying models, or you're running your own models, or you're hosting a specific type of model that you want to improve the outputs on, like one specific version of a model someone else made, and you're just serving compute differently that speeds up the outputs. So inference is a really big domain where I want to say there's probably half a dozen subnets doing some form of inference on Bittensor, which is a front and center, very fundamental AI use case, because you want to talk to the models, you want to get value from the models, you want the models to generate outputs that are useful, and so inference is pretty popular.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk. I want to dive deep a little bit on exactly how some of these subnets work and the incentive models. So there was ARCA, the basically the hedge fund, the crypto hedge fund, puts out a newsletter, weekly or so. That I generally read it when it comes out. And they did a whole one on TAO and Bittensor this past week. And one of the things that they said was kind of interesting. They said, sorry, I'm looking for it here. Blah, 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 blah. They basically said that the business development team of Bittensor is are the validators. And they seem to suggest that that basically the validators are a party which can then sell the AI that's produced by Bittensor to some customers, right? So I'm trying to figure out here, like, what is the line between when you create AI for Bittensor, it's supposed to be sort of this PBS or Linux open source kind of thing where everybody can use it for free forever. But some people are talking about selling commercial products based on Bittensor. Where is that line, and what am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do?
Yeah, it's a really, really big question, and it's a great question. So, how do you reason through what Bittensor incentivizes into existence, sort of crypto economically, versus what the subnets produce that you could actually monetize using fiat?
Yep.
That's kind of your question in a nutshell.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken. So just to break this down for people a little bit more that are not as familiar with Bittensor. Bittensor is using a token-based incentive mechanism. Fundamentally, like the most fundamental incentive mechanism is this token called TAO, TAO. It has hundreds of millions in volume on a daily basis. Sometimes that goes up, sometimes that goes down. But it's a top 30, top 25, top 30 cryptocurrency. It's traded in a lot of places, has a lot of liquidity. It's worth $4 or $5 billion non-diluted, worth $10, $15 billion diluted. So it's an asset. And what you first think about when you're producing a digital commodity, or one of these subnets producing data or compute or inference or labeling or protein folding, what have you, there's a variety of puzzles. You have to remember, Bitcoin has its own puzzle, which is, as you were saying, you're guessing SHA-256 threshold. Each one of the subnets on Bittensor implements its own unique puzzle. And each one of those puzzles, if the miners on that subnet solve the puzzle with the highest degree of competitiveness and accuracy, they are rewarded with a significant fraction of the emissions, the tokens that basically get paid to that subnet. And
it's like being a Bitcoin miner, basically. Same idea, except you're mining AI effectively.
Roughly speaking, correct. And so one question that you could ask that might help answer your question, which is related, would be, how do Bitcoin mining operations monetize their businesses? And we actually have two big examples of that. I know one is a public company, and one is not a public company. The one that's public is called Maven, or Marathon. They're in the United States. They're a public company. Their ticker symbol is MARA, and they're one of the top 5 Bitcoin miners in the world, I believe. The other one is Foundry by DCG, and that's a private company. And I believe they're the largest Bitcoin operation in the United States.
That's Barry Silbert's company.
Correct, Barry Silbert's company. Who also happens to be the largest holder and investor of TAO. He owns close to 3% of the network, which is
he's a TAO whale for sure,
which is substantial. But that is the largest holder by far, which is also a good point to know, because it's a very decentralized ownership. Yeah,
and there's 21 million coins, of which something like 6 million. It's just like Bitcoin. There's 21 million coins total possible. There's like 6 million in circulation.
7.5, something like that.
Okay, so I was close, but not quite.
Yeah,
7.5.
So, how do Bitcoin miners monetize their operations?
They sell Bitcoin.
They sell the Bitcoin.
Yeah.
They generate fiat from that, and then in some cases, well, I believe you can do this with Bitcoin. You just send it to a zero address, or sort of like a void empty address, and then you burn the tokens that you earned, and so you're just
You can do that. I don't know why you would, but yes, you can.
Yeah, I don't know how many operations do that, but I know it's a pretty common pattern in crypto
For
overall.
people to burn their Bitcoin?
Well, I don't know if people do it in Bitcoin as much as they do in like Ethereum or other communities. But it's kind of an interesting question. How do they monetize their mining operations? Do they seek to just own more Bitcoin over time? Or because how else would they fund their
I
operations?
mean, pretty much, right? That's my understanding. They just sell the Bitcoin. They try to hold on to it as much as they can, right? Because
Right.
we all know that, like, if you sell Bitcoin now versus 5 years from now, you're losing a lot of money. So if you can just somehow hang on to it for 5 years,
Right.
you're gonna reap a much bigger reward.
Going to your question, which is actually a very nuanced question that requires a more elaborate answer. I don't think it's as simple as saying you're just going to hold on to TAO and never monetize any of the commodities coming off of the network. It's also quite different than Bitcoin because Bittensor's actually rewarding useful outputs of work that have real utility and real value in the world, and not just SHA-256 numbers. So it is an interesting question, and I think we're still starting to see some more evidence of this, that some teams like Macrocosmos or Manifold or TensorPlex, they're creating subnets, they're mining the network, but they're creating subnets that earn them some TAO. But the things that are actually getting produced by those subnets, by those subnetworks of the overall Bittensor blockchain, they are actually solving real world problems.
Right. So that is sellable stuff potentially.
Sellable stuff. It's sellable stuff. You can build an API around it and charge dollars.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. Like, how can you do that? Is that allowed? Okay.
Absolutely. Not only does it allow it, it is just another expression of the duality of capitalism, where you can have monetization in cryptocurrency and you can have monetization in fiat currency. And there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with that. My philosophical view is that we're going to basically pass the sort of moment where fiat currencies have any real utility and value for humans, because they're extremely controllable and exploitable by governments that can get very corrupt. They aren't actually backed on any finite, scarce resource, and you then also run into the lack of discipline that comes from not being backed on any really finite, scarce resource, and so you just end up printing more money and then causing basically the inevitability of hyperinflation. And so when you have the inevitability of hyperinflation, that is kind of scary. It's possible to rein in control of just this addiction to money printing. It is possible, but it's so unlikely, because across any administration that we've seen in the last, 4 or 5 administrations, both sides of the political spectrum, money printing has been rampant since the 90s. Rampant.
Yeah, the temptation is too great.
The temptation is too great. I never would have thought in my life that I would be a Trump supporter, and I am a Trump supporter.
Not the first time I've heard that.
I'll tell you, I cried. I actually cried in pain, and I couldn't sleep for a couple of days after Trump was elected in 2016. I thought that the country was in a state of corrosive and just like point of no return division, and it was just incredibly painful. And I've completely reversed my view based on the last 8 years of learning and watching and seeing how the world has developed. So, I think one of the most important things you have to do in life is be willing to change your mind in very significant ways based on the data.
Yeah, I think David Sachs on the All In Pod kind of said it the best. Actually Chamath said it the best. They were talking about Trump versus Biden at the time, and now Kamala, obviously. And their observation was, we didn't like the messenger, and we'd been and the reason we didn't like the messenger in part was because we were fed this steady drumbeat from the mainstream media of who this person was, and that just wasn't true. And but sort of seeing through that gook and the sort of propaganda that they threw at people was, it's just really hard. But when you actually sort of dig down to the policies were the right ones. We've had the AB test now, and it's pretty clear that Orange A won. Now, Orange A is a crass individual. There's a lot of things we don't like about him, even though we're voting. I'm voting for him as well.
Yeah.
But what you described to me is a journey that a lot of my friends have gone on. People who have flipped from blue to red. I swear I never thought I would see in my lifetime, and I see a lot of it now. So
going back to your question, not to get too far.
Sorry, you got me thinking about it.
I opened up the can of worms.
You opened the can of worms, the orange can of worms.
I got this can of worms. So how do you monetize? How do you monetize these subnets? It's totally fine. My view, though, is that we are not going to have fiat currencies in the way that they exist today within the next 50 years. And I think we're both pretty young people. We're probably going to still be around.
Well, I'm not, but yes.
Yeah. Well, I think, you might be a little bit older than me, but we have these technologies that are coming out that are going to solve for longevity and disease and really incredible things, Mark, that are going to make us live much, much longer than we're currently living. I don't think that we're going to live forever. I think there's probably going to be plenty of really profound breakthroughs in the next, for sure, in the next decade. Could be even the next 5 years. I think for sure in the next decade, where humans live 10, 20, 30, 40 years longer than they live now. As long as you don't have like really serious, debilitating, chronic and horrible disease today, and you stay relatively healthy for the next kind of 5 to 10 years, I think those breakthroughs will be there. So my view is within the next 50 years, fiat currencies will not exist in the same way that they exist today. Central governments will start to embrace cryptocurrencies. They'll either create their own, which will be seen with a lot of resistance from the sort of broader open source community of people who care about, actually permissionless technology. And then there's going to be, a selection of, 5 or 10 assets that the world builds on. And I think one of those is going to be Bittensor for producing, sort of these infinitely improving AI commodities. We're going to have a handful of proprietary labs, like things that sort of look like Anthropic and OpenAI. And those companies are going to be really huge, and they're going to be centralized kind of providers. I'm not a maximalist in anything. I don't really think that like there's going to be one approach and one modality that replaces all the other approaches. But I think Bittensor will succeed at a level that Bitcoin has succeeded already, and Linux has succeeded already in different parts of the technology industry. And I think we're going to see that in really profound ways play out. But I don't necessarily think like subnets that monetize their commodities and build a SaaS company or a proprietary company or whatever around like taking the commodity that comes off of the subnet and building around that. I don't think that's actually a bad thing. I think that that's a useful additional demonstration of, hey, look, you're a consumer. You're using, we're all on our phones all the time. We have 50 apps that we use. One of the 50 apps happens to be powered by Bittensor, subnet 48 or whatever the number is at that time, or subnet 320. Like, you won't know. You won't need to know as a consumer.
Well, I just want to get back to this. Let's get back to some specifics here, because I'm trying to like really imagine how this is going to play out, right? So let's say I have an idea for an AI company, effectively an idea for a subnet or a venture-backed AI company. I can go and raise some money from Sequoia or whoever, and maybe this is not necessarily an either or choice, maybe it's an and, but the other alternative, the other path is to go and build a Bittensor subnet. And immediately I am earning, as I produce AI, I am earning TAO, which I can then keep and put it in the piggy bank and just sort of amass value, or I can sell it. It's sort of like being a Bitcoin miner. And so that sort of funds my initial development, by maybe my first couple of years. But then after that, I realize that there's a market for this AI that's being produced by Bittensor, by my subnet, and I decide to slap a toll booth on that AI. Now that means that the public can no longer use that AI, at least in part, because I need to put that toll booth up, right? So now if I just gone straight with Sequoia, uh, when it comes time for me to put up my toll booth, I'm free to do whatever I want. I can maximize profits. So ostensibly, I can make more money there than on the Bittensor side if there are restrictions on what I can sell. So it's better in the beginning, but maybe not as good in sort of year 3 and 4. What do you say to that?
So if you'll allow me, Mark, there's a few flaws to what you mentioned that
Please.
I want to just correct and then update a little bit the understanding that folks hopefully can have of what subnets are. Subnets are not a single controlled technology or invention or innovation or commodity by the person who runs and creates the subnet. That is not the case. A subnet is something where you almost act as a co-competitor or a co-conspirator or a co-inventor along with everyone else producing the commodity on the subnet. And so the network doesn't like lock down or prevent access to what's getting produced on the subnet based on whoever runs the subnet. The subnet succeeds or fails based on the value that the network decides the subnet is producing on the output side, like what the subnet is actually producing for the world. So this is more like infrastructure. It's like a lower level utility sort of like exchange. It's an exchange of these utilities or commodities that get produced, right? And so unlike, let's say, the NASDAQ, where you have tons of companies that are listed, they're technology companies, or say the S&P 500 index, where you have companies that are a certain valuation or a certain revenue. I think it's a few billion in revenue and 10 or 20 billion in market cap or something like that. You can get added to the S&P 500, top 500 most valuable companies in America. The companies and the board of directors behind those companies can underperform. They can miss their earnings. Their business can collapse. They can stop innovating. They can stop competing. They can stop, producing valuable services and products and goods for their customers and for the economy and for the world. And they will get deregistered from the S&P 500. They will no longer be in the S&P 500. By the same token, subnets on Bittensor will die and wither and get, sort of like pruned or cleansed from the network for not producing a sustained high rate of innovation. But it is not, so that's the similarity, but here's where the differences end. In the context of Bittensor, you don't have like one group of people able to control, exactly how the subnet's commodity can be accessed. What you do is you have a group of people who are focused on implementing the incentive mechanism, which is the design of what the subnet is going to reward people for solving, right? What puzzles is a subnet specifying that the miners are supposed to solve? And that's really the job of the people who create the subnet. But they're not the CEO of the subnet. They're not the board of directors for the subnet. They're not,
who is
the startup.
Who decides? Who does the pruning?
The network.
So basically the network, but that means people voting?
Correct. And they vote with their TAO and they vote with the
Okay.
stake, and they vote with the stake of the TAO that they have. The way the network currently works is much more centralized because the network is young. And
Yeah,
subnets
sure.
did not exist. Subnets did not exist as an idea a year ago.
Yep.
And so we have 5 validators that represent 80 to 90% of the overall token supply that weighs, which subnets actually get rewarded with some of the emission. Okay.
Yeah.
And
It's a bit incestuous at the
and
moment.
the largest one is the foundation, which has 1.4 million TAO, which is by far the largest validator. And there's a small handful of people that are making highly curated judgments and decisions based on which subnets can receive those emissions. That is going away very soon and will no longer be the case. But it is a necessary transition. In the same way that it's a necessary transition for you when you raise your children, to guide them with your morals and principles and integrity and ethics and worldviews and ideas and lessons and personality. But when they become an adult and they leave, guess what? It's all up to them what they do in their future in their life, and they're going to make their own mistakes. And so Right now, Bittensor is kind of in this kind of like pubescent stage of maturation where the way the emissions actually get rewarded to these subnets is highly centralized. And in the near term, which is like 6 to 9 months from now, the network is going to go through this upgrade where the token holders have the ability to vote and express their conviction and their weight to specific subnets purely on the merits and the subjectivity and the speculation of the token holders overall. And we're going to see a much more laissez-faire, free market capitalism type of dynamic, allocating money to tokens, money and capital effectively to these subnets. And that's, I think, a moment where we're going to start to see some really much more interesting things happen.
Yeah, so you're talking about dynamic TAO, I believe, specifically, right?
Yes.
So I know you're talking about it generally, but the idea is that each subnet will get its own token that you can only get by locking up TAO or selling TAO. I'm not sure which it is, but you basically exchange.
It's kind of a staking. It's like a staking operation.
It's staking. Okay, so I stake my TAO in subnet 33. I receive back subnet 33 token.
Yes.
And I now get a little stash of that. And if subnet 33 does really well, then I get a larger share of TAO emissions. And one thing we haven't mentioned yet on this pod, we've talked about it before, is that as a mere mortal owner of TAO, I'm not a validator. I don't run a subnet. I'm just a guy that's got some TAO. I can stake my TAO with a validator and earn 16% APY roughly right now, which is pretty great. Right, that's actually a pretty good yield, and I've been doing that for a while. And yes, the yield really is 16% on average. So, so you have this Bitcoin-like dynamic. Then you also have this staking dynamic where you can get yield. So it's as if you were in the Bitcoin universe, you could stake your Bitcoin with a Bitcoin miner and earn more Bitcoin that's mined by the miner. Correct. You can't do that in the Bitcoin world, but it's like if you could. So that's
you can.
That also
you sort of can. You can do that by basically taking your I mean, this is a sort of answer, but you can. This increases the risk massively. I would not recommend doing this. In fact, do not.
The people who try to do this shit with Bitcoin put it into Celsius and things like that, and they got burned.
Not a good idea. That's not a good idea.
Yeah.
What I was going to say though was you could convert your Bitcoin to a stable coin and send it as an investment to Marathon, which is a public company, and hold the Marathon stock. And the Marathon stock gives you exposure to the Marathon's mining mining operations. But I would not do that. So there's 3 ways of like investing your TAO on Bittensor. One is, as you mentioned, which is very common. You can stake your TAO and delegate it to a validator. And in the traditional money management world, the analogy that you should think about for what a validator does is like Blackstone or Sequoia or I don't know, Renaissance or any money manager. Any money manager could be a hedge fund, could be venture capital, could be index, could be retirement savings, like across the risk curve. Like super, super risky to very little risk to close to zero risk. That's what a validator does. A validator manages risk for the token holder. That's one option. So you have to do your diligence. You have to learn about which validators are out there. You have to learn about the people behind them. How do they make investment decisions? What's their worldview? How do they assess the subnets? How many subnets have they been validating and staking against already? All these kinds of questions, you have to do your own research. There is more risk. The second thing that you could do as an option with your TAO is stake to subnet 0, which basically is an even weighted sort of like index of all of the subnets. And so you're just going to get the average performance of all of them. The last thing that you could do in no particular order from, placing your TAO and trusting it in the hands of a validator or staking it to subnet 0. The third thing would be playing the casino and gambling yourself, which is very difficult. And it's like basically being a VC yourself or being an angel investor or you could do some combination of all those things. You don't need to have all of your risk allocated to one of those types of strategies. You could say we're gonna put a little bit in a validator, we're gonna put a little bit in subnet 0, and then we're also going to take some of the TAO and stake it to subnet 9, subnet 29, subnet 4, what have you. And that's also valid. You could totally do that. And as you said, for the next network upgrade that's coming out, you could do really well and earn a lot more if you make the right decisions with subnets that end up being the top 10 subnets or the top 5 subnets. My view on the distribution of subnets overall on the network is that there's probably going to be 5 to 10% of the subnets that dominate 90% of the emissions. So it's going to be a Pareto distribution. You have a Pareto distribution. And power law, you have a power law kind of curve. It'll look like a hockey stick.
Like everything.
Like everything, like biology, like this is like life in general.
It's literally everything.
It governs our fundamentals of physics. And, I think as there's more subnets, that will become a stronger power law, like a more extreme Pareto distribution. So hundreds of subnets, your distribution is probably going to get shrunk and concentrated even into the top 5%. Thousands of subnets, you're probably going to get in the top 1 to 2% of subnets that you want to be in. So the difficulty of basically managing the risk curve grows in proportion to the number of subnets over time. Therefore, my most kind of like honest and highly recommended strategy for people would be to stake to probably one of the top 3 validators that are very trusted after you do your research and your diligence. So some blend, or just stake to subnet 0 and do not speculate on placing your tokens within specific subnet pools and converting your TAO to a specific DTAO alpha token, because the risk there is really immense. And just so that people understand the risk, I can explain it briefly. The downside is 100%. You could lose all of your TAO. The upside is capped to the total market cap of TAO. So it's capped to the market cap of TAO. So, but then you have to ask, what is the potential of the market cap of TAO? Now, my view is that it is multiples of Bitcoin. That's the potential market cap.
Really? So you actually think it's got a bigger potential than Bitcoin itself?
Something like 10 to 50 times.
Wow. Okay, that's really interesting. I didn't realize you were that bullish. I'm definitely a TAO bull, but I'm not that much of a TAO bull. But what is your thinking on that? Why do you think? Yeah.
Well, I'm a little disappointed, Mark, because you've been following me and I've been tweeting about my answers to this question for some time.
I know. I've seen some of this, but for the show, just give us the explanation. I want you to say it.
To the audience. No, I love that we're having just like a totally, and this, everyone knows it's totally unscripted. We're just having a conversation.
Yeah.
There's no teleprompters.
Not to go back to politics, but yes, there's no teleprompters.
I have distilled this view into one tweet that I will try to remember because I've done so many tweets on this. Bitcoin continuously produces cryptographically verifiable money. Bittensor continuously produces cryptographically verifiable intelligence. And the value of all of the currencies in the world is something like $100 trillion. And so that's why I think Bitcoin has about 100x from here, from 1 to 100 trillion.
Yep.
The value of all of the intelligence that we could produce as humans is infinite. It is not hundreds of trillions. It is not quadrillions. It is infinite. And when you have something that's infinite, you're going to go through a price discovery curve that plays out until the singularity, when we merge with the superintelligence AI that we'll probably create. And I imagine that's going to happen over the next 50 to 100 years. This is not happening within 5 to 10 years. I'm sorry.
When you say merge with the superintelligence, are you talking something like the end of Star Trek 1 where the man merged with V'ger, like that kind of a merge?
Yeah,
that's what you're thinking of. Okay.
Yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah, something like that. But we're like a century away from that. Like all the stuff people are saying about, oh my, we're gonna the AGI, like it's waking up. It's gonna wake up soon. Like what Sam Altman is saying with AGI. And I think AGI is an anti-human, silly term that is not grounded in any fundamental truth whatsoever. And it was invented as a term to steal money from investors. That's what I think about AGI. However, having said that, we are.
So, I just want to make sure I define your vision of AGI. Do you think of AGI as a conscious machine? Is that your interpretation of it, or is it a machine which can accurately, replicate? It can simulate a human so well that we can't tell the difference. Like much more so than the Turing test.
Neither. I don't think either of those are
accurate. Okay. So what's the picture in your mind of an AGI?
I don't think that I don't like the premise of the acronym in the first place. I take exception to the premise that led to the creation of the acronym. So that's why I actually would prefer to basically not even give it dignity to try and define it. Because here's what AGI fundamentally is trying to communicate as a term. Okay. Fundamentally, it's saying that humans are about to go the way of the dodo bird, and we know what that threshold is, and we're going to give it a name, and it's called AGI. Okay, that is a criminal thing to do, and it is a disgustingly egotistical and dismissive phrase that postulates that what the boundaries of human potential are, which is laughable. We do not remotely know what the boundaries of human potential are. I'd like to tell you something that most people don't know, and it's probably if 100,000 people watch this or 1 million people watch this, there's going to be less than 10 people that will probably know what I'm about to say. So there's this guy named Erwin. No, not Erwin Schrödinger. That was Carl Schwarzschild. Carl Schwarzschild discovered Einstein's theory of general relativity paper in 1915, I believe it was. I could be wrong, but I think it's 1915. And within weeks, not decades, not years, weeks, Carl, while he was sick with a life-threatening disease during World War I, sent Einstein perfect, not approximate, but perfect symmetrical solutions to the differential equations of general relativity that Einstein put out. They were perfect. Einstein.
Can you explain what that? Sorry, I'm not following. I don't know the details of this. So Einstein was like, I came up with a thing, but I need someone to solve some equations.
Correct.
And this guy went and solved the equations, and
correct.
This was apparently like ridiculously hard. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Roughly speaking. Yes. So general relativity says that the speed of light is the same regardless of your position in the universe, and regardless of how you look at it, it's the same. And that's the theory, and those are differential equations. And the way in which you can go and solve those, there's many different ways you can solve them. A lot of people have attempted different approaches, and a lot of his work has been built on. And Einstein was actually wrong about a lot of different things.
Yes.
But Carl Schwarzschild saw the paper and said, I'm going to offer my perspective on how this is perfectly solved. And the Schwarzschild singularity is basically, black holes. Like you're going into the black hole, and there's the event horizon, and things are kind of like slowly getting swallowed by the black hole. This guy's brain is probably some approximation of what you consider to be the boundary and the full potential of what a single human is capable of. And we have so few examples in history from then, which is like slightly over 100 years from 2024, where we're speaking now, where brilliance and imagination and inventiveness that have proven scientifically accurate to extremely high degrees of precision with the latest technologies we've invented. How many times has that happened in the last 100 years? Not that many. But I would even go as far as to say that example is not the full potential and the full scope of what a human is capable of. And so when you say AGI has already been here for like a long time. Okay, you want to baseline what the average person knows, what the average person is capable of, what the average person is able to reason through and create and invent and learn. I'm sorry, like we have passed that threshold for a while, and as far as I can tell, we're not in some weird dystopic reality. Things are only getting better. Things are only getting a lot more interesting. Yes, people have to think more critically because there's more subjectivity and fake news and fake information and misinformation in the world. Well, that's only a function of the propagation of technology and digitization and devices. There's more internet consumption. There's more application usage. There's more social media, et cetera, et cetera. And so the only real solution to misinformation and deep fakes in this is called thinking from first principles and being critical about the things you think and not believing everything you read on the internet and thinking for yourself. People do not have a muscle for this because of the educational system. I was born like a weird alien, homeschooled. My mom and my small group of family members were my siblings in my student body, and I never went to high school or college, and I didn't get sort of like warped by all of these different types of frameworks of learning. So I'm lucky. I'm very fortunate. I think from first principles when I get out of bed in the morning. That's just how I'm wired. I don't have sort of like institutionalized brain, and I didn't go through a lot of the experiences that most people went through. So I'm very, very lucky. But I would say, like, in general, we don't know the scale and potential of what humans can do, and so that's why I think the term AGI is really silly. And so a big reason why I'm a huge fan of Bittensor is it basically says you have an incentive system that rewards people for thinking critically and for inventing and being creative, and permissionlessly without the control of any censored organization that has a particular political agenda and that wants to propagate their worldview on the rest of humanity. To me, I think that's a really important invention, and I think it should really succeed.
Yeah, I think you make a really important point, and I've in my own brain, I think, made a similar point. We don't really know what consciousness is, right? So supposing that we can make it, it feels like we're missing some really key ingredient. Our brains, like we have to sleep. Like we have to sleep and dream. Otherwise we go insane. What is that? Right. And I don't know whether that's just because we have wetware and that requires recharging for some reason, or whether that is a critical component of sentience and consciousness itself. I suspect it's the latter, but nobody knows.
Consciousness may not be important either. I think there's like an over-rotation and an over-obsession in terms of what consciousness is. I think consciousness, to how we approximate it, could really just be as simple as bit flipping on your conventional transistor, except from the sort of like evolutionary process that created us and all the different types of cells that we have and the way we go and do differentiation and all this. Like, I think it could actually boil down to being very much the same thing.
Well, I think there are absolutely things that are similar to that. But like, for example, there's something about our observation which interacts with quantum mechanics, right? There's somebody at home using the bits and peering out through them.
Yeah.
Quantum mechanics says that if an observer observes a system, the state of it changes versus if nobody's observing it. And in fact, there are now papers which suggest that reality doesn't even exist unless there's some being looking at it. And this is like hard science. It's not like, I did ayahuasca and came up with this. This is like hardcore mathematics, right? And if that's the case, I would propose that a computer could be said to be sentient if it can collapse the quantum wave equation in the same way that a human observer can. And that would be a very interesting test.
I don't know if that's true, because there are a huge amount of inconsistencies and things that contradict each other when you look at quantum mechanics and compare it to general relativity and normal world of atoms physics.
Yep.
And we don't like if you talk to physicists on that are knowledgeable about both of those things. We really don't know anything about anything.
No, I'm kind of with you on that.
We don't know anything about it. They're collapsing a wave function. What is the wave function? What does it mean to collapse? Like all of these things are completely theoretical, and we haven't been able to simulate them and falsify them at a large enough scale. And that's kind of how I think about that.
Okay. All right, let's come back to Bittensor and TAO and all that stuff. We've taken a nice little journey. But I'm with you that human potential is unlimited. So I like that point of view. I'm sort of in the Dune camp where, in the Dune universe, the machines are subservient. In human potential, the various schools like the Bene Gesserits, the Bene Talilacs, it's all about the Mentats. It's all about making our brains more powerful through various disciplines, as opposed to making better machines. The machines are there, but the human mind is at the forefront in the Dune universe. And I like that view, and I agree with you. I think that's where we're going. So coming back to Bittensor and TAO, you said something pretty interesting. I'm going to read you back your quote, and then I have a quote which is sort of similar. So let me do the two quotes. So you basically said on X, there are three great blockchain inventions. There's Bitcoin, which gives us proof of work. There's Ethereum, which gives us smart contracts, and there's Bittensor TAO, which gives us UMA consensus, i.e. proof of useful work. So that's sort of quote A, that's you. Quote B is, and I was discussing Bittensor, and I said, the intersecting flywheels of proof of work plus required staking for miners and validators, which is an element that's not in the Bitcoin blockchain. So there's additional blocking of coins, which makes them less liquid, and it's required for the growth of the network. Then you have the Bitcoin economics of 21 million coins only. Plus you have the open AI apps and utility and revenue. Just all of that combined seems to me to be potentially a very insane valuation driver. And in fact, it looks like it's the biggest engine of valuation driving in all of crypto, maybe even in all of business. So what is your reaction to that? What do you think of those two things?
I think it's true. I think what you just said is accurate. Bittensor has the potential, with further maturation and stability of these core primitives, right? This notion of subnets, this notion of both deterministic and probabilistic incentive mechanisms, where you specify some puzzle or some computation or some output that you look for, and people mine and compete and work together to solve for that. I think it indeed is the evolution of capitalism, which if you look at how value creation and value capture specifically, but also value creation, has materialized in the modern world since the Dutch East India Company, the first corporation. I think that it could indeed be the substrate for the most economic impact since the invention of capitalism. I really tend to think of it actually as an extension and an evolution of capitalism, more than anything else. Actually, I don't really think of it as like it's another smart contract blockchain, or it's another L1 or whatever these buzzwords are, because I think you do need cryptographic scarcity, and you need a permissionless, peer-to-peer decentralized kind of network that anyone can contribute to and influence and participate in to make these things work. So yeah, I think it's definitely true. To play slight devil's advocate, because I think it's not even necessarily devil's advocate. It's just kind of like thinking honestly about these ideas. If you reduced the technical complexity for someone to create their own L1 by 1,000 times. So let's just say the current complexity of creating your own L1 successfully today is like at this level. 1,000 times less would make it such that anyone can create an incentive mechanism with their own L1 and bootstrap a whole ecosystem around it with miners and validators. I would say that would effectively be what Bittensor is unlocking. today. And sort of at least the initial groundwork, unlocking the initial groundwork for that, because the network itself is still pretty young. There's maybe a few thousand miners on the network. There's 150,000, say, token holders. So it's very early. It's kind of like, where was the internet in, the early 90s, the mid 90s? There was like 5-10 million people on the internet. Now we have billions of people on the internet, right?
Yeah.
Why? Because the difficulty and the complexity were reduced massively to both learn and participate on this network, as well as create economic activity and create businesses and create capitalism, right? Like the internet made it possible for Amazon to exist. The internet made it possible for Google to exist. The internet made it possible for Facebook to exist, right? And so Bittensor is going to make it possible for certain things to exist that otherwise would not have existed because of the technical complexity and the technical difficulty, right? And so the only way I can kind of think about a devil's advocate thing for Bittensor maybe just being like an initial starting point for the ideas, and then it sort of dies off and then other things kind of take its place, would be if it were 1,000 times easier, not 100 times, it would be like literally 1,000 times easier for an everyday normal entrepreneur, capitalist person wanting to invent something, create some useful product, and then launch that in the world, and have the cost of that come down by 1,000 times for anything, not just for, like, for example, Shopify, like selling items on the internet. Like Toby is probably one of the top 10, top 20. Hopefully he watches this. He follows me. We've done some work together. He's bought a company for me. He's invested with me a bunch. I would say he's one of the top 10, 20 entrepreneurs alive today. He made it 1,000 times easier for people to transact and do commerce on the internet and experience e-commerce in a very frictionless way, and removing a ton of friction. And he has $1 trillion in economic activity unlocked on a yearly basis now, increasing. His GMV is now just recently passed $1 trillion, I believe, a year ago, and he's taken 10% of that as a share of value capture in the stock of Shopify. It's a $100 billion company, liquid $100 billion company. And Toby has earned his $10 billion of that because he owns 10% of Shopify. So I think the engine, the machine of capitalism is the most profound thing. But if you reduce the friction and the cost such that anyone could create their own L1 blockchain for specifying an incentive mechanism and getting rewarded in some scarce supply of a token, you still then need to bootstrap a network effect of validators and miners. So that's why I think it would be like still prohibitively difficult to recreate.
Yeah, you might as well just use Bittensor and the architecture
are already really
and try to redo all that. So I totally agree with you on that.
The Bittensor network effects are really strong already, for sure. Yeah.
So we're coming up. We're a little bit past the hour, but I want to keep going. I got two more things I want to practical things. Sure. So bringing it back down from the ethereal realm, more down to sort of nuts and bolts things. So I've heard that there is an EVM coming to Bittensor, to the TAO blockchain, Ethereum virtual machine. Is that true? What do you know about that?
Yeah, that's true. It's coming.
That is true.
It's actually already built, and it's getting shipped to a bunch of providers that want to add support for example, Fireblocks custodying TAO, large qualified custodians like Coinbase Prime and Anchor would then be able to, with high levels of assurance, custody and hold TAO on behalf of their clients and their institutional customers. And it's called the EVM palette. Bittensor is based on, like, the core blockchain code is based on the Polkadot SDK. It's not a parachain. It's not a side chain of Polkadot. It's its own L1. And the team basically inherited a lot of the technical primitives in that code base that make it pretty easy to support EVM-based interoperability. In fact, Polkadot was invented and created by Gavin Wood, who's a co-founder of Ethereum. And so, there's infrastructure that exists for that, and that's definitely going to unlock a lot more standardization, integration, support for TAO, for Bittensor across the whole Ethereum ecosystem.
That is enormous. Okay, I wanted to confirm that because I wasn't sure if that was a rumor, whether that was true. That will also, I assume, unlock all kinds of new DeFi protocols directly on the TAO blockchain.
Sure.
Like there'll be lending and staking for dynamic TAO.
Sure.
there'll be a Uniswap for dynamic TAO tokens.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not. Well, it could.
But why not?
Well, it could.
It can happen, right?
It could happen
Permissionlessly.
It could happen.
Yeah. So it'll definitely happen given all the activity over on, if there's an EVM, this will absolutely happen.
Yep.
So I'm very excited for that. And I would assume also that means new bridges in and out of TAO.
Correct.
That are sort of EVM. Oh, that's enormous.
Correct.
So there's going to be this giant explosion. Do we know when this is coming? Do we know when this is going to arrive?
I know that it's implemented and it's there, and probably weeks away from getting widely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, this is massive. Yeah. I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, look, listen. Why are we on the show 3 times? Every week that goes by, the pace of innovation and execution on Bittensor is really incredible. Like, there's new teams building things, new ideas, people launching things over the weekend. There's probably a dozen or two, maybe even 2 dozen now at this point, venture funded startups that are purely focused on Bittensor. It's a lot. There's a lot happening pretty fast.
That is huge. So last blocking and tackling question, I'll let you go. So right now I'm getting the 16% APY. I know that's not going to be like that for much longer. We're once we move to the dynamic TAO system, you have the potential to make more. But if you don't bet on anything, you'll probably make less than 16%. Do we know when this switch over is going to occur? My 16% is going to go away and make me cry?
I would say within the next 6 months.
Okay, so it's not like tomorrow. It's
I would say within 6 to 9 months, I think is what it's
okay. So the getting's still good for a little while for anyone who wants to get on it, but it won't be there forever. So that's
we have to really zoom out though and look at the value of the network is some square root or some equation of the overall activity of what the network can produce collectively, and so I think that there's a world where Bittensor reaches a price point far surpassing where Bitcoin currently is within the next 5 to 7 years.
Wow.
And that's kind of why I've been so vocal about it, because on one hand, yes, I mean, it's the economic side of things. People trade the markets. Look, money and capitalism are forms of expression. That's what they are at the end of the day. They're forms of communication. If you're on a desert island, are you really going to be opening your phone, looking at your portfolio, and really thinking about the numbers going?
Well, I probably would, but that's okay.
I mean, you're going to be. How do I get my next meal? How do I find shelter? How do I not get eaten by the lion chasing me up and down the beach because it wants to eat me? Right. The money is a figment of our imagination. It is not intrinsically valuable. What we can create with our minds has intrinsic value. Life has intrinsic value. Nothing else. It is our imagination and our life and our minds that have the only things that have intrinsic value. Nothing else has intrinsic value. Everything else is just a form and a medium of expression.
I think you're right. Well, JJ, thank you once again for giving us yet another hour and fascinating conversation.
It's my pleasure.
My name is Mark Jeffrey. This has been Hash Rate. We'll see you all next time.
Thanks.